sized reliquary of 23.5 by 11.5 inches, in which the shroud sustained the cluster of burn marks. During this time of preservation, the only serious damage that the shroud has suffered is from fire, and that is less likely to happen now by accident. Other damage has been deliberate and controlled, i.e. the removal of the ends of the side strip as relics. In removing these corners, they chose areas of lesser importance and preserved some symmetry. A comparable example of removing parts from a relic whilst leaving the original size discernible is seen in a relic of the cross. First slide, please. First slide. Luce. No. A relic of the cross, which was photographed in the 1930s in the Cathedral of Notre Dame, Paris. It can be seen how a corner has been removed, just as on the shroud. The removal of the corners from the shroud has also left some historical dating, documentary and metrological. But some of this historical evidence has been damaged in recent history, in 1973, when more of the frontal image corner was cut away for examination. This corner should have been left intact, because evidence of the shroud's history has nearly been lost. Fortunately, the early photographic record of the shroud has recorded what was there before samples were taken. That is the cross relic, and you can see how the corner has been removed, preserving the length and overall dimensions of the original relic, just as on the shroud. As can be seen from a photograph after the cuttings, next slide please, the removed samples have left a light area on the backing cloth, and this maps out where the end of the side strip terminated. Observe a small white peninsula at the very end. Here was originally a small piece of rolled end, and this was left deliberately to show that the corner had been removed from the shroud. This is also the case at the end of the existing side strip. A slip of cloth was left by whoever removed the corner, just as an extension to indicate the original line of the cloth. What makes this corner so important is the actual length of cloth removed. And when I have examined the shroud myself, I shall be better able to assess what historical unit of measurement may have been used in the removal of this corner of approximately 6 inches, because it is more than probable that a particular length was decided on, and then the contemporary unit would have been applied. The 2 small protrusions left during the cutting show that a corner existed in the first instance. Next slide, please. And here, in the Henri A photograph of 1931, at the end of the frontal image corner can be identified the small rolled end of the side strip left on the shroud during the original cutting. And I would like to know where this important fragment has gone. There is an important reference to a relic in 1870 by de Fleury. He saw a fragment of the shroud in Lyon. This was originally from Sainte-Chapelle, Paris. It was of a very smooth linen of 26 by 18 millimeters. Other details need more elucidation, but one aspect is extremely relevant. The length of 26 millimeters is exactly 1/3 of the width of the shroud's side strip of circa 3 inches. It would be practical to divide a strip of 78 by 18 millimeters into 3 equal parts, each making a good-sized relic fragment. The last shroud sampled in 1988 for the radiocarbon test. Apart from further damaging this corner of the shroud, the tests are totally unnecessary as the date of the cloth is self-evident. 21 scientists put their names to a report of February 1989 in the British periodical Nature, stating that the radiocarbon results, quote, provide conclusive evidence that the linen of the Shroud of Turin is medieval. These scientists have not examined the evidence properly. Their statement is a gross misinterpretation and shows willful disregard of all other data. Edward Hall of Oxford University called the Shroud a load of rubbish. This is a statement that gives serious cause for concern about his ability to examine evidence. All these scientists lack the only qualification that would have saved them from such an irresponsible proclamation: intelligence. They read only what their instruments told them. Nevertheless, the shroud has reached 1993, rolled up with burn damage and with parts missing, in a casket of the medieval tradition. So the next 2 important stages for the shroud are, first, correct and appropriate conservation, and secondly, the establishment of correct historical data and further research. The conservation of the Holy Shroud is not just another museum project. What would happen if the British Museum owned the shroud? It would be in their medieval gallery, pinned to a board after a visit to the cleaners. And look at what is going on in the Cairo Museum. The Tutankhamun funerary artifacts are disintegrating. So conservation has to be intelligently advised, applied and accomplished, and this to what is not a museum object, but the holiest possession of Christendom. Look at how another relic from around the 1st century has been properly housed and appropriately conserved in the Holy Land, in the shrine of the Book at Jerusalem. Slide, please. The great Isaiah scroll is displayed in a large circular cabinet over 24 feet long. Next slide, please. Although the shroud would need much more protection and design, the similarity between the Isaiah scroll and the shroud is interesting. Both are long strips and of now delicate material, and both existed in the time of Jesus, and both are from the same provenance, and they are both prophetic witnesses to each other. And they gave him the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. He opened the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor." And again, they gave him a grave with the wicked. In his death he is with the rich man. Truly, if a rich man, Joseph of Arimathea, provided a fitting tomb and fine linen shroud, so should this generation provide a fitting shrine for the shroud of the Lord. For the Holy Shroud should have a purpose-built housing to enable it to remain completely secure and conserved without the need for rolling and unrolling the sacred linen. It must have properly controlled atmospheric and lighting conditions. The light will have to be strictly regulated so that the image is preserved. The cloth should be laid out flat and free from stitched-on foreign material. The removed backing cloth should also be conserved as an important historical document. The removal of the backing cloth is needed for important reasons: to see that the underside is in a stable condition and to facilitate inspection and research. This would also be the ideal state for the cloth for placing in a completely transparent full-length case, which would allow both sides of the cloth to be inspected without opening the case, except where necessary for specific reasons of research. Conservation must mean protecting the shroud from any alteration, such as attempts to remove creases. The creases in the linen are of utmost importance for detecting how the shroud was originally used and treated historically. And this is why the shroud should not be further subjected to creasing by being kept in a small reliquary, which has served till now. So a proper full-size shrine should be provided, but where? The obvious place is within the Vatican, but the disadvantage, which Turin does not suffer from, is that the Holy Shroud would become just another tourist attraction. A shrine in a non-tourist area would be less likely to be inundated with secular sightseers. However, Turin Cathedral would have difficulty in accommodating a full-size housing for the cloth and the millions of Christian pilgrims that would wish to venerate the shroud. A full-size shrine, wherever it is eventually placed, will have to be absolutely secure from fire, theft, bullet, bomb, gas explosion, earthquake, lightning, flood, chemical attack, war, and however remote, nuclear explosion or a retreat provided for such a threat. The recent attacks on the World Trade Center in New York and in Bombay show what determined terrorists can do. There will always be madmen and fanatics, and the fire attack in 1972 shows how close an assailant can get to the shroud. Security will mean a 24-hour high-security guard, because the very existence of the shroud, when its genuineness is realized, will undermine the Muslim creed, with all the consequences that this implies from fundamentalists. There will always be a threat from those who are anti the shroud for whatever reason. Because the shroud is unique and must not be lost, it must be fully documented by photography. This is so fundamental a precaution of conservation that this alone should necessitate the removal of the backing cloth. At the moment, only half the shroud is recorded, and photography applied to the image side of the cloth as well as to the reverse side without the backing cloth would also register important new details. There is a small possibility that there may be a cloth maker's, i.e. a weaver's mark on the underside, but this may have been on the missing corner areas. There is a lack of photographic and other data on the ends and edges of the whole cloth, the nature of the seam and stitching. All this can only properly be done by removing the backing cloth. It goes without saying that access to the shroud for non-destructive tests and examinations will be synonymous with conservation. The more knowledge that is accumulated, the less likely mistakes will be made, such as cutting off the corner in 1973. There is one place that has not been looked at, the place where they laid him, the place where the image was created, the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. There is only brief historical records of what lies under the marble slab that now covers the rock bench. Next slide, please. This is the traditional site of Jesus' tomb, and so a proper scientific and archaeological examination of the remains is long overdue. According to Arculf, in the 7th century, the funeral bench was part of the rock. By 1112, it was covered with marble. In 1555, Boniface of Ragusa, when renewing the covering, discovered a piece of wood, probably a cross relic, and a parchment with only 2 of the words thereon legible, Helena Magni. In 1808, Maximo Simmias was the last to see the bare rock, and he explained the trough in the bench as due to pilgrim damage, i.e. taking pieces as relics. Once the covering is removed, it should be clear how the surface has been rendered from the tooling marks, and the original overall design may be detectable. So what is under the marble slab is going to be important for many reasons, and this includes the possibility of matching trace elements with the shroud. Any data might help to verify the site itself. So now is the time to arrange for the tomb to be uncovered and examined. It would be appropriate to recover the rock bench with transparent material. As well as the physical protection of the shroud, there is also the question of ideological and intellectual attacks on the shroud, and not only from incompetent scientists. Many writers use the shroud to promote their own crank theories to prove that Jesus did not die on the cross, and as with some other writers, have a commercial interest in the shroud. In other words, the holiness of the shroud is to be conserved. and that would exclude non-believers from any control or decisions on the Holy Shroud. There is the ultimate reason for correct conservation of the holy cloth. It belongs to Christians. The shroud is the most precious sign of the suffering and resurrection of Jesus. Christians will come to see their Lord, a pilgrimage to venerate and be near the Lord. Therefore, the shrine will also be a place for the solemn liturgy. By solemn, I mean without corruptions such as guitars and polyphony. Wherever the Holy Shroud is finally placed, planning should be such that Christians are not prevented from access through inefficiency by tourist abuse. The circle is complete. The shroud is under the guardianship and care of the Apostolic See. The Holy Shroud is a treasure beyond price, along with the Gospel. The invitation was given to disciples almost 2,000 years ago. Come, see the place where he was laid.